Good morning. We are excited to kind of be here this morning. I'm sitting here with Michael, who just kind of decided to jump in and help me out with this thing. We're looking at week 3 in discipleship today. So we're just going to be talking a little bit about what's it look to start taking those things that God is telling you and put them into action, and what's it look like to have somebody help you with that or to help somebody else with that. I think that's just one of the things that we often struggle with. We try and do things by ourselves, and we don't often help grow each other in some of those practical ways of becoming more disciplined people. So we're looking at 2 Timothy 1 today. Paul writing to Timothy. Paul is very much like a discipler of Timothy, a leader of Timothy. And so they talk a lot when they're together. Now Timothy's not with Paul, and so he's writing him a letter. He writes him 2 letters, first and second, And so he's kind of encouraging him throughout that. So we're looking at chapter 1, just this greeting area. And we see that he writes a few things. And so we're going to jump into some of the questions. We're not going to read it together. They can read it and kind of know what we're talking about. I don't want to waste too much time. But in verse 7, we see that Paul says... Paul writes to Timothy and says that God has given us a spirit of power, of love, and self-discipline. I'm just curious for you, Mike. We've had some good conversations. Why do you think it's important that Paul reminds Timothy that this is a gift that God has given him, right? Power, love, self-discipline.
I think, honestly, at this point in time for Timothy, it's kind of 2 reasons. One, just being a Christian at this point in time is hard. People are kind of not exactly open to your message.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Lash out rather harshly. So I think at that point, you have to be reminded that show love to these people, be powerful in the face of adversity, and have the strength that God helps provide for you. But also, now he's alone. He was always with Paul.
Yeah.
He had Paul there, and now that kind of earthly safety net is gone too.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, even with me not being there, remember that God's the one that provides you with love and strength and all these things.
Yeah. Man, that's interesting. The power one, I think, probably gets me, maybe the power and self-discipline one. I remember in college at some point, one of my professors was telling me that it's a sin to be lazy. And I kind of shouted in class. I was loud. I said, "What?" Right? Like, what are you talking about? And he talked to me a little bit more. And this idea that God, is calling us, right, to be active and intentional and planned, but that He also gives us that kind of that spirit to be self-disciplined, to be powerful and make those things happen. I think that's, as we looked at last week, kind of in the vine and the branches, it's one of those things that you see starts with your relationship with God, right? So even as Paul is saying, like, hey, Timothy, remember you can do big things, you can do great things, you can make improvements and make changes, but he's also saying it starts with God, not with Paul, right? But Paul's going to play a part in it.
Right.
So it's the spirit that God has given you that's going to allow you to do these things. And don't forget that. But we're going to talk about this a little bit too.
And God can work through all of those people. God can work through Paul to help Timothy find that in the beginning. But in the end, it all comes from God.
Right.
So, and it's hard when you lose that earthly safety net that you can see in front of you, you can actually have a conversation with. But at the end of the day, you have to remember it all comes from God.
Right. So let me ask you this: that kind of earthly safety net or that earthly discipler, right? We know that our relationship with God is going to be hugely important in this. But who are people, or how have people discipled you? Maybe either of those questions. Who are people who have kind of discipled you and been that safety net and been that spiritual supporter who have grown you? And maybe also, how did they do it? How did they help you improve as a follower of Christ?
I mean, I think I have a huge safety net just because through the church, through this school, my parents, I was raised that way from the time I was young, and I was always kind of protected and discipled from kindergarten all the way up.
Yeah.
I had teachers in my life that were always there to encourage you and help you learn, help you become disciplined because you needed to be for the classroom. I had parents that taught me the values of hard work, of how to be a better follower of Christ, how to be better in all these facets, and then you have church on Sunday where you have, a community and the pastors and everybody who are all there to help each other grow in that way.
Yeah.
And I think I'm very fortunate to have that in kind of most of the facets of my life.
Yeah.
And there's just a huge community of it.
Right.
It's fantastic.
Who do you have any? So let's say you got something like you're trying to improve your devotional time, right? You're sitting there and you're saying, all right, here's an aspect that I think through my prayer time or through my conversations with other people, God has told me, hey, I need to kind of work on this thing. Do you have people who you could go to and say, hey, I'm trying to be better at this thing. Would you help me improve at this thing?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I have people here. The big one, I think, would be my mom, because she does like a nightly little devotion through like different books that she got from the church she went to when she was a kid. I'm sure if I went to her, she would either let me read those or we could do them together.
Right.
I mean, usually that's kind of her personal time, but like we could.
Yeah.
I'm sure we could work something out. I know I have people I could go to, and a lot of it honestly comes down to the idea of self-discipline and just getting that time down, doing it, even if it's like, oh, I'm tired and I want to go to bed. Like, it doesn't take that long. Just
right.
Do it.
And that's one of the things that's crazy for me though, is that, and we talked about this a little bit too, and I've talked about this with tons of people. A lot of people want their devotional time and prayer time to be better.
Right.
But they haven't been able to actually. A lot have made progress and improvements, and it's a spectrum of kind of good and bad sometimes. But there's a lot of people who haven't been able to kind of make that happen, right? They want to, and they talk about it, and it's not that hard. But for some reason, they've had a tough time making that change. And one of the things that I've seen is that, so for example, at some point, a couple different times, I've used like Google Docs, and I've done like devos with other people to an kind of where I'm with a buddy and his name's here and my name's here and somebody else's name is here and we're like, all right, this is what we read, this is our prayer for today, and this is whatever. But having that on a Google Doc where we saw that each other were or were not doing it, created some of that accountability and support. And so I could text my buddy, or my buddy could text me and say, hey, Zach, I just noticed like the last 2 days weren't, you didn't get that devotional time in. How's it going? Is everything okay? Do you need any assistance? Right? Have you been getting bored and you need something interesting to read? Or, but having that kind of direct person to check in and help me out with was really important. And so, have you had any of those experiences? And I'm sure you have. But those experiences where like somebody just kind of checked in and was like, hey, how's this thing going? And how do I kind of help you be better at that thing?
I mean, as far as devotional time specifically, probably not a ton.
Sure.
But in parts of my life, absolutely. I've had people all throughout my life who are there for me when I've kind of stumbled here and there and have asked me how I am and how they can help me improve.
Yeah.
And I think even if it God doesn't directly come up in that conversation,
right?
God's still shown in that conversation just through that love, that compassion for one another,
right?
And that helping each other when you can't just help yourself.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Man, this has been such an important, I think, aspect for me to start experiencing people who were intentional about helping me follow God. And that was, I think, it was challenging at different times because some people would help me in a lot of different areas. They'd help me like be good at work, or they'd help me be good at sports, or they'd help me be good at these different things. And sometimes those things aligned, but when I started experiencing that, people would like, hey, let's pray together out loud so that you become more comfortable praying out loud, right? And so that in the future, like, I'm going to pray over you, right? I'm going to put my hands on you. I'm going to pray for this situation. But I'm also going to ask you to pray back so that next time when you come into contact with somebody else who needs prayers, you're comfortable praying for them out loud.
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I'm kind of teaching you and training you how to do some of these things. And sometimes that's somebody who's ahead of us, and sometimes that's even something that we ask those peers to do. Right. So this is, I like this little section that Paul kind of writes, that to fan into flame this gift that God this gift of God, and to not be ashamed to testify about our Lord, and then later again to join me in suffering for the gospel, which is not a fun verse. Why do you, as you look at some of those things, why do you think that that's in there? Why do you think that Paul, as a discipler of Timothy, is saying, hey, don't be afraid to suffer for this gospel?
I mean, I think, again, that comes back to the history of the situation when most of these Christians are going to suffer for their faith. And even, today, most of us don't.
Right.
There's a lot of them around the world that do, though.
Right.
And to them, their faith is tested every day.
Yeah.
And it's kind of just a reminder that I'm calling you to this because I never said it was going to be easy.
Yeah.
To follow is never going to be easy.
Yeah.
It takes things like self-discipline and love for your enemies in the face of adversity. It takes all of these things.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
Yeah.
It was never supposed to be
Right.
easy. It's a long road, and it's a road that you have to kind of travel your entire life.
Right.
But, that reminder of, I'm calling you to suffer, which is a small fraction of what Christ suffered for you,
Right.
so that in the end you can experience a relationship with God.
Yeah.
That joy that comes with that
Yeah.
in eternity. And it's, like, world isn't perfect, and
Right.
people are going to suffer, so be prepared for that. It's a verse for preparation.
Right. I think too, like, even if we don't suffer a ton, maybe some people do suffer more now or less, but we also don't act still because we're afraid of suffering. Right.
Yes.
So even if the suffering isn't actually going to happen, I still don't act because I'm afraid it's going to happen.
Well, and even now, it's not necessarily even suffering like someone's going to throw me in jail or beat me. It's the fear
Right.
of ostracism.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Being
Being
ostracized,
ostracized.
right?
Like-
being pushed out of the group. I mean,
People are going to look at you and go, why are you bringing that up? Like,
Right.
that's weird. And we're such social creatures that, if that's the worst we're going to suffer compared to other people, that's not awful.
Right.
But, at the
Right.
same time, we're still wired to
tough.
be
Right.
social. And when
Right.
we lose a group
Right.
for that, it's hard.
It's hard. You know what? This is kind of interesting, and I think I'm not sure. I think we got to start wrapping up here at some point. But I could talk all day, and everybody who listens to any of this knows that.
It's okay, so could I. It's fine.
I know, it's why we work well together. But no, I look at some of these things in other areas. Like so you go to the gym, you do an improv class, you do a theater class, you do anything that's kind of stretching you outside your comfort zone, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's these things that you want to do. Like you want to push yourself hard and accomplish something, right? But you're scared or nervous to try it. Whether the pain is going to be there from the gym, it's going to be a physical thing. Whether you're nervous about giving up that chocolate bar in order to be more healthy because you're not, that's just how you've done things in the past.
Right.
Or whether you're in that theater thing and you're about to make a gutsy kind of inflection or like risky thing that people could make fun of you for. That in many of those areas we have somebody else to be like, just do it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, come on. Like, you want to be this. Like, you can do it. Be this.
Confidence in a lot of that is key.
Yeah.
If you approach those things, like those risky,
Right.
some of those things, and you're very timid,
Right.
then people will latch on. They think it's a mistake.
Right.
If you do it with confidence,
Right.
and you go forward with confidence like that God can provide for you,
Yeah, I know.
then at least, even if they don't agree with you, they're curious.
Right.
People are
Right.
drawn to confidence.
They
So
are.
if you can approach
Yeah.
it with confidence, whether it be that risky move in theater,
Right.
or talking about Christ, even if people don't necessarily agree with you right away,
Right.
it's less, they don't write you off.
Right. Right. And so like that confidence, I love these, like, I'm one of my spiritual gifts is a little bit of the encourager. I think we lost you guys for a second. We're talking about confidence a little bit. You were just making a comment that, it's kind of that confidence that one helps us act, but two helps people to be a little bit more receptive. And one of the things, God created us to just kind of be creatures of community, right? I mean, his very essence is the Trinity, right? Not the trilogy, the Trinity, and very nature is community. And He creates us in His image, and He creates us to be members of community, and that those people around us can give us that confidence, right? They can, or at the very least, they can remind us of the confidence that we have because we know who He is, and so that so that those people can help us kind of make that effort to stop eating that chocolate bar or to whatever, but also to be better kind of followers of Christ. And so that's just one thing that I'd love to see happen within our small groups a little bit more. And some of you guys are doing a phenomenal job at this already. But as I'm in Mike's small group, and I'm going to ask you, hey Mike, what's God kind of calling you to do, right? And then how do I kind of help encourage you and support you and give you the confidence or the plan to actually do it, right? Do you want me to shoot you a text throughout the week? Do we need to go and do this thing once together? Do we whatever? And you're going to give me confidence back in other ways too. So how do we support each other in putting those things that God is kind of calling us to do into action? Now, one quick thing, I might occasionally suggest something to Mike, but this is mainly going to be driven by Mike telling me what God's calling him to do. I might be like, hey, have you considered this? But I'm not going to expect you to do things that I think you should do. I'm going to expect you to do things that God's calling you to do. So small group leaders, thanks for coming in. Mike, thanks for joining us today. And we'll see you guys next week.